Good morning, everyone. I am super excited to be here. More importantly, I'm super excited to be awake in time to be here. I'm not really an early bird, so I was a little worried about being able to get up. But I'm here and I'm super excited to be here. And as Lisa mentioned, my name is Johnnie Jae, and I am the founder of a Tribe Called Geek, which is an incredible media platform for Indigenous geek culture and STEM. I really wanted to make sure that, as Indigenous people, we're very invisible on our own lands. And so, when I started Tribe Called Geek, it was really to celebrate the contributions that we make to pop culture and also to STEM, which, there's so many stereotypes about Indigenous people that a lot of people believe that we were very primitive and that we were just kind of hanging out here before colonization happened. And that wasn't true. We've always been scientists, we've always been teachers and healers. And that's something that I really wanted to celebrate through a Tribe Called Geek. And I'm super fortunate that, it has grown to the point that it has and that I'm able to do the work that I do. And so that's a little about what I do. But I am here today to talk about healing in the spirit of creation. And this is something that, boy, it's something that I think a lot of us have struggled with, is trying to find our path to healing, whether it's from grief or traumatic events in our lives or, just life changes that kind of throw us for a loop. It's really hard for us to kind of find the path forward. And some of us struggle with that because life doesn't stop to let us recalibrate. It doesn't stop and give us a moment to really think about, what's next for us. We just kind of have to just kind of roll with the punches as it goes. And that's really difficult, especially when you're in the midst of grief. And that's really the focus of what today is trying to heal from grief and trying to navigate and find your way through it. Because I think over the last couple of years with this pandemic, a lot of us have been hit with grief. And I may cry a little bit. I try not to, but it's really hard for me to talk about my experience still because I'm still healing. So through this pandemic, it was really hard for my family. We're all we're all immunocompromised in some way. And so my family right away, we knew that we were going to have to take a lot of drastic measures, for my aunt and her husband and their family. They right away, they basically said their goodbyes and they were isolating apart. That her sons worked for the tribe, worked for IHS services, and were working with the public. The same with her husband. So they understood that they were at greater risk and they were taking precautions. My aunt has lupus. My uncle had diabetes. And so, they knew that they were compromised. And they were both infected early on in the pandemic. And, this was like in 2020. This is probably about 2 months after the shutdowns. Um, my uncle contracted COVID and, he had to be ventilated. My aunt started developing signs soon after, and she also had to be ventilated. And it was really hard for our family because we didn't know what was going to happen. And my aunt was ventilated for 3 months and she survived. And it was a miracle because she had lupus and, she had a lot of other health problems. And, we were pretty much prepared to have to say goodbye. And, she recovered. And, she's been doing very well, which is a miracle. And we're very grateful for that. My uncle, he passed away after being ventilated for 6 months. And, that was really hard for our family because when my uncle passed, we were basically just waiting for him to wake up. The virus had cleared his system and, they were just like, okay, his body has healed enough, it's time. And, they started pulling back the sedation and we were waiting for him to wake up. And they told us because he had been under so long that, it may take a couple of days, it may take a week. It just depended on his body. And unfortunately, it was a lot of damage that was done. And when they started pulling back the sedation, he did have a stroke and he passed away. And it was really hard for our family because, like, as I said, at the beginning of this pandemic, we knew that we were at higher risk, and we knew it was a possibility, but you just don't expect it to happen. And, we as a family just kind of couldn't be together. We couldn't mourn. The family couldn't have the funeral the way that you normally could. And that's really hard for Native people, because we do have a process of how we mourn, of how we say goodbye to our loved ones in a way that allows us to kind of navigate our grief. And as a community, there's a lot of community care that is given. And because of the pandemic and because of, just how impacted Indian country was, we weren't able to have those ceremonies. We weren't able to have, that community care that is so vital. And it was really hard. But we kind of did our best. We navigated it the best we could. And, we kind of just counted our blessings. But then, last year, my family got hit with COVID. We'd taken a lot of precautions, especially for my mom, because like me, she has lupus and she was very immunocompromised. She also had diabetes and she was going blind. And so my family, they're home in New Mexico. I'm here in LA. But we took a lot of care, like making sure that we were safe. Even my partner kind of went to extremes here to create a safe environment for me. And, I'm still COVID free to this day, and it hasn't been easy. But, it really doesn't matter how careful you are, because there's a lot of other people in the world. And when they don't take those same precautions or they don't take that same care, it's going to end up impacting the people, even if they do take precautions. And that's what happened with our family. My sister's partner got COVID from a coworker who knew she had COVID, but because it was so mild for her at the time, she didn't think it was a big deal and that it was something just like the flu. So she went to work. And, it kind of caused an outbreak through not just, my family, but through the town, because of the contact that she had with different customers. And my sister's partner got COVID and he had to be hospitalized. He developed COVID pneumonia. And my sister, because they have small children, she wasn't really able to isolate right away. And they didn't know that he had been exposed right away either. So, it kind of presented a lot of different problems. But as soon as they found out that he had tested positive, they went into lockdown. They isolated my mom, my dad, and my brothers, pulled together to, take care of the littles while my sister was taking care of her partner. But then a couple of days into their isolation, my niece, who was 3 years old, started showing symptoms. And, they had her tested and she tested positive for COVID. So then there she goes into isolation. And because she had been with the rest of my family, they started watching for symptoms and started testing. And a couple of days after my niece started showing symptoms, my mom started showing symptoms. And so she went into isolation with my sister as well. And, at that point, my sister's partner had been hospitalized. So it was just my mom and my niece. And everything seemed to be going really well, actually. My mom didn't have a lot of severe symptoms, but we did have to fight for her care. I don't know how many of you guys are immunocompromised or have health issues and had treatment plans developed with your doctors, that were like, okay, in case you get COVID, this is the course of action we're going to take. Well, that's something that we had with our doctors. We had treatment plans laid out in our charts, like, okay, if this person gets COVID, this is what we need you to do to try and make sure that they come out of this okay. But those treatment plans aren't necessarily followed by the hospitals, and it depends on the resources that the hospitals have as well. And unfortunately, because my parents lived in a rural area, my mom's treatment plan wasn't able to be followed. And she had been doing very well, but we had to fight for her to get treatment. And, when she would get the treatment, she was responding. She was only maybe 2 days away from the end of her isolation period. And it seemed like she just had a mild case. We were super excited. And I had talked to my sister, like I'd been in constant contact. I was talking, calling, and we were FaceTiming and just staying in contact. And every time I would call, like my mom was in good spirits. And, the 2 days before her isolation period, we were just doing our morning check-in and everything was good. We were joking, we were laughing. And then 6 hours later, everything changed. My sister called and she's like, Jay, she's like, I had to take mom to the hospital and I don't know what's going to happen. And she goes, they wouldn't let me stay with her. And she's like, I'm just waiting to hear back. And I was like, well, what happened? Because my mom was just laughing. My sister was like, well, she's like, we had dinner. She goes, mom was feeling really good. And she goes, I called Annette and I had her pick us up some dinner. And she goes, because mom wanted a milkshake. And she goes, so, I thought because she's feeling better, she wants to eat, let's kind of celebrate. And she goes, we ate dinner. She goes, we were laughing. And she goes, and I turned around to ask mom a question. And she goes, she didn't answer me right away. And when she did, she was slurring her words. And she's like, and I turned around like, what? And she's like, mom was blue. She goes, her lips were blue and she just wasn't breathing. She goes, so I went and I got her oxygen tank. And she goes, we got her at oxygen and she was starting to do a little bit better. She goes, and I thought, okay, it was just a little rough patch. And she goes, but then 30 minutes later, she goes, I looked over and she's like, and mom, like I started saying, mom. And she's like, and she couldn't answer me. She couldn't breathe. And so she's like, we got in the car. She goes, I brought her up here. And she goes, and I'm just waiting to hear what's happening. My mom has always been prone to pneumonia. And being a mom, you oftentimes put your needs aside. And my mom was doing the mom thing. She was trying to be strong, trying to be brave. She was trying to be there for my sister because her partner was hospitalized. And we didn't know, if he was going to come through. And she was trying to help my sister with my niece. And, she was kind of downplaying a lot of her symptoms. So we didn't know that my mom had been struggling for a few days. We thought she was getting better. But my mom was hospitalized with COVID pneumonia. And she seemed to be responding pretty well. But because my mom was going blind and she couldn't breathe, she started having panic attacks in the hospital. And we kind of fought with the hospital. And I know it sounds crazy, but like we were like, somebody needs to be there with her. She can't, if you can't sedate her, somebody needs to be there with my mom, as if there's somebody there, even just that you could call or whatever, that could help her kind of calm down and remember where she's at, because she would go to sleep and wake up and she would have panic attacks because she didn't know where she was and she couldn't see. And she was tearing out her IVs and she was just having a hard time. So we started fighting with the hospital to see if somebody could be with my mom. And, we understood the risks. And thankfully, the vaccines had come out at the time. And I had already been able to get vaccinated. I was 2 weeks after my second shot when my mom was hospitalized. And when we started to make these requests, and, the hospital said, well, if someone's willing to take the risk, we just require that they be vaccinated and, you could be with your mom. They were like, but, once the person enters the hospital room, they're not going to be able to leave. And when they leave, they're not going to be able to go back in. So, you need to make sure that whoever is going to be with your mom is going to be there kind of like for the long haul, because we need to eliminate the risk of exposure for everyone else. And we kind of decided at the time, because I was the only one that was fully vaccinated, that I would take the risk to go in. And everybody was also really scared because I have lupus, and my partner was worried because we'd been taking really strict precautions to keep me safe. And here I was, willing to go into a COVID ICU unit. And we got approval, we made our plans, and we were getting ready to leave here from LA. We literally had just got on the road. We were like 10 minutes into our trip. And my sister called me and she's like, Jay, they had to ventilate mom. And she's like, so when you get here, she goes, just go straight to Albuquerque. She's like, we already called the hospital, and they're going to honor the arrangement that we had with this hospital. And she's like, so they know you're coming, just go directly to the hospital. And so, we drove through the night, and we got to Albuquerque, and like I was calling, and I was trying to see where my mom was at the time, because I'd gone to the hospital and she wasn't there yet, and they had a snowstorm and they couldn't fly my mom out to Albuquerque yet. And they were like, but she's on her way, and she'll be there in about 30-40 minutes. And I was like, okay. So we got breakfast, and I got the call from the hospital that my mom was arriving. So we headed to the hospital, and I was there as they were taking her off the helicopter. And, I got to be with my mom while they were kind of getting her situated. And, we hear the stories about the toll that it takes on healthcare workers. And just, we understand, this is a very serious illness, but I wasn't prepared to actually see it. When I got to the hospital, they were still trying to figure out the right settings for my mom's ventilator. And even though she was sedated, her body was struggling to breathe. And she was just, hyperventilating. And they were like, we're sorry you have to see her this way, and they were like, give us an hour, let us get her situated, and we'll bring you back. And I was like, okay. And, I held my mom's hand, and I told her that I was there. And they took her back, and, I was waiting in the hallway, and they finally came and got me, and they were like, okay, your mom's settled in. We need to walk you through the protocol. And I was like, okay. So they took me back, and we were on a COVID ICU unit. And when I walked onto the floor, walked behind the doors, I was kind of shocked, because every single room on the floor was full of people in the same situation that my mom was in. And, we've had heard the stories, my aunt, my uncle had been ventilated, and, my aunt had shared, like her experiences, and, we've heard stories from healthcare workers, but being able to see it like up close really kind of changed my perspective, that this was something more serious than what even we thought it was. And it was really hard. My mom was ventilated for a month, and we had a lot of hope. My aunt had pulled through, and we had no reason to believe that my mom wouldn't do the same, because she was so stubborn. But unfortunately, the damage that COVID did to my mom's body was so severe that she wasn't going to recover. And even if she had been able to recover, she would have spent the rest of her life in a rehabilitation center. She wouldn't have been able to eat, or even breathe on her own. And they just told us, that there was no way that she was going to come out of it. And, we were with her for a month. They let me and my sister take turns because my sister's partner was still had COVID and was recovering. And, of course, she had the kids. So, when she couldn't be there, I would go in and, we had a pretty strict protocol that we had to follow in order to eliminate the risk. We had hotel rooms set up, and we couldn't really go anywhere. It was to the hospital, it was to our hotel rooms. We couldn't see any the rest of our family. We had to make sure that we weren't putting anyone else at risk, and it was a very strict protocol. And when we would go to be with my mom, we also had to be in full PPE while we were with her. But we were very grateful to be able to be with my mom. Every single day, one of us was with her, and we got to hold her hand and talk to her. And, we'd call our relatives and let them talk to my mom. And the day that we knew my mom wasn't going to make it, was a really hard day for me and my sister, because it was ultimately going to be our decision. And, we really struggled. But my mom passed away on April 2nd. And it really changed everything for us. And we've been struggling with grief. As I mentioned, life doesn't slow down to let you catch a breath. We were with my mom for a month and fighting for her to survive, to come through it. And then all of a sudden, we're making funeral arrangements and, trying to, in an instant, actually become adults. And not, who didn't have their mom to make these decisions or to help us navigate or to know what to do. It was on us. And it was really, really hard. Because, like I said, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to really get that community care. We weren't able to mourn the way that we should have been. And for us, we were really fortunate as a family because, we got to be with my mom through the whole thing. We were there as she took her last breath, and her funeral was one of the first funerals that our tribe was allowing. And so the protocol really wasn't fleshed out that well. And it was also really difficult because our tribe is located in a state where they didn't really take COVID seriously. And, having gone through everything that we did, it was really difficult for us to really make people understand, why we were taking the precautions that we did or why we were so cautious. We literally just watched our mom die. And it was really hard to kind of that back and forth of trying to find a balance between, being safe, but also following through with our traditional protocols for the funeral and getting people to understand that, it wasn't just a matter of having my mom's funeral or letting people say goodbye. Like, we didn't want other families to go through what we had gone through. And it was a really, really hard process. They were still trying to figure things out with the tribe. And, of course, as a community and a global community, we were still trying to figure out things as well. And it was just really, really hard. And it really felt isolating. And I found in the aftermath of everything that I couldn't do the things that I normally did. It was the coping mechanisms that I've developed over my life. Loss is nothing new for me. I've lost a lot of friends to suicide, and it's something that unfortunately I think a lot of Native communities deal with. We say goodbye more often than we say hello to people, or more often than we're able to celebrate life events. We're saying goodbye to people. Um, and so loss is nothing new. And, I've developed a lot of coping mechanisms over the year, and none of them were working. I'm a writer, so usually when I'm struggling, I write. I put my feelings into words and I express them in some way. But all of a sudden, I couldn't write. I couldn't talk, and I'm a talker, um, because words made the whole thing real. And there are still things that I can't say because it makes this all real, and I'm not really ready or prepared to face the realness of what it means, when of what it means for me, when I am ready to say these words. And I found that, I couldn't, there was no way to really express myself. Words, they were just too real. And I struggled so hard, and I couldn't figure out a way through. I couldn't figure out, like, well, what do I do? And, like, I was in therapy already previous to the pandemic, and it was kind of helping me get through the pandemic. And, like, I struggle with grief, and that was why I started therapy in the first place, and was to figure out how to cope. And I couldn't even do therapy because I couldn't talk about what I was experiencing. And so a lot of my therapy sessions ended up being joke sessions, like a stand-up comedy routine where I was just making jokes and, just trying to find humor in everything, even if it was inappropriate. Um, and just, trying to entertain, or I would rant about my favorite TV shows to my therapist. And, like I couldn't say what I needed to say, and I still really can't. It's really difficult for me to talk about this experience because it was just it was more than I was ready to experience, and I think it's more than anyone should experience in their life. But my mom was an artist. She was a singer. She did a lot of things in her life, and I never really thought of myself as an artist. I've been a graphic designer for over 20 years, but I never really thought of it as being an artistic extension of myself because I was always bringing somebody else's idea into fruition. And so I never really considered myself an artist. My brother is a brilliant artist. And, I have a lot of family members who are just incredible, really well known artists. And, I never really thought of myself as an artist. I'm a doodler. But because I couldn't write, because I couldn't talk, I kind of reverted back to childhood a little bit. So when I was younger, because I have lupus, I was sick quite a bit. And I was under a lot of stress, and stress, of course, triggers flare ups. And my dad had been doing a lot of research on, how to help me. And he ran across an article where they were talking about art and it being a really great stress reliever. And he ran across a particular article where they were talking about coloring and how giving somebody a coloring book and crayons and letting them just color helps them refocus and helps, calm, like it has a very calming effect, and it takes a person out of the moment and they're able to just concentrate on, staying in the lines. And even if they're not staying in the lines, it's therapeutic because they're letting out like aggression in ways that they don't know they are. And so every time I would get sick, my dad would buy me crayons and coloring books every single time. And I had an abnormal amount of crayons growing up because every time I would get sick, he, like, even if I had crayons, he would just buy a new pack. Um, and I had coloring books galore. but it did actually help me. And so I started reverting back to that, and I started coloring, um, just trying to figure out, like, okay, what do I do? Like, how do I get through this? But I started coloring, and I had been before this all, I had been selling T-shirts online and designing them. But again, like, I never thought of my graphic design or anything as art. And so as I was coloring, I started realizing, like, oh, like, when I'm doing my T-shirt designs, it's the same effect. Like, I'm getting out of my mind. I'm able to focus on color and, making sure everything is just right. And I started designing more, and I started coloring more. And a few months after my mom passed away, there was a contest for the eighth generation blanket design contest. Eighth generation is a really great company that really kind of works to develop Native artists and to give them the opportunity to, to create and to be supported in that creation. They sell wool blankets and a lot of different goods that are designed by Native artists. And they have this annual contest. And every year, that since the very first year that they announced it, I wanted to enter, but I was so afraid and thinking that I'm not good enough, I'm not an artist. And I would see all the other artists that had entered, and I'd be like, no, not now, maybe next year. And because I'd been doing this and kind of realizing that, life is short, like, we can't really wait um, for things to just happen or for us to be ready. That's not the way the world works. We just have to jump in and do things. And I thought, I'm going to enter. I don't know what's going to come of it, but I just want to say, like, for my own peace of mind, that I did this. That way, in case something happens to me, then I'm not looking back like, I should have done this, I should have done that. I can start making that change now to where it's like, I did it. It doesn't matter if I win or not, it's the fact that I tried. And so I entered the contest, and I kind of forgot about it until they started announcing the contestants. And I was like, oh, I was like, crap, did they have to put my art next to that artist's art? Like, and I was just kind of cracking up because I was like, yeah, there's no way. And because everybody was so incredible. And then a couple months went by, and they announced the finalist, and I was among the finalists. And I was like, oh no. And the other two artists who were also named as finalists are very well known. They have huge social media followings. And, like, their work is just incredible. And I was like, it's an honor just to be here in the finalists. And it was a people's choice contest. So, people were voting on the art. And, I was sharing the links, but I was just like, there's no way I'm going to win this. So I'm not going to get my hopes up. And I ended up winning the contest. Um, and they called to tell me that I won. And I remember just kind of thinking, oh, okay, my mom's just, this is a joke. My mom's messing with me again, because my mom would always, she was a prankster. And I was thinking, oh, now that she's an ancestor, things are going to get really funky because my mom's over there now. And it was the first time that I realized, like, oh, like, okay, I am an artist. And because I won this contest, they have to do promotion. And they were like, can you do a live Instagram with us? And, and show people, like, your artwork. And I was thinking, oh, I was like, you mean live? And it was really a hard process because I never really thought of myself as an artist, but here they are wanting me to do artist things. And I was just like, okay, they're going to know I'm a fraud. But I started trying to, because all my work is digital at the time, and they wanted something like physical. And so, like, I started trying to figure out, like, okay, well, what can I do artistically, physically? And I landed on fluid art because, it's a lot like coloring. And it just like you have to mix colors, you have to mix your paints. And, I found it was very cathartic for me. And I started doing art. I started doing paintings. And you can see a couple of the things that I've done back here. I'm still learning a lot of techniques. But the crazy thing is, my art's been selling. My t-shirts have been selling, and I've been able to kind of find my voice in all of this. And I need to share my story, because when we're healing, and for Native people, grief is a really sacred time. And it's hard to really wrap your head around the concept that grief is sacred. Um, but it is. And for a lot of us, our tribes believe that when a family is in mourning, that's when their prayers are more powerful because they haven't fully said goodbye yet. So there's a connection between us here in the realm of the living and the world beyond. And there's still a connection there. So, they believe that our prayers are more powerful because of that connection. And, during that time, a lot of families are, it's just protocol that you don't participate in certain ceremonies, you don't go to social events like powwows. And it's not supposed to be isolating. It's just because of the power that you have during that time, because our tribes believe in balance, in keeping a balance of power. And sometimes when, like during grief, when those emotions are so strong, when that spiritual connection is so strong, it could disrupt the balance in ceremony. So there are certain ceremonies that you're asked not to participate in for the year that you're grieving. And when your grieving period ends, there's a ceremony that closes that connection, that allows the family to fully say goodbye and to start living again. Because in the moment of grief, like my hair is still short. When my mom passed away, we had a hair cutting ceremony, and they cut our hair. And our hair is buried with my mom. I had spent so much time trying to grow my hair out, and I'd been joking, like nobody died, because it took me so long to grow my hair out. And I cut my hair when my uncle passed away, and then I had to cut my hair when my mom died. And my hair grows so slow. And I also ended up cutting it again because I kind of had a little breakdown where I thought, you know what, I can't do this. And I made a big change. I bleached my hair and dyed it green, and that was a big mistake. But but hair is sacred to us, and it carries all our memories, our that we have. And that's why natives don't often cut their hair. That's why they try to have the long hair. It carries all our memories. And when you lose a loved one and you cut your hair, you're saying goodbye to that time of your life. And it's the start of a new beginning. And traditionally, once you cut your hair, you don't cut it again, or you don't go and get it fixed, because they literally just pull it back in a ponytail and chop it off. You don't go and get it evened out or anything like that, until a year has passed. And for our tribe, we have, once that year passes, we do ceremony again. And for us, it's when the person dies. Like my mom had what is called a hintaro, which it means basically friend. And we call them Indian friends in English. But throughout your life, that person becomes your family, and you treat them as your family, and even better than you would your family. And when you die, that person's family is responsible for putting you away. So they take care of the family. They do the cooking. They sit with the body through the days of the funeral, and they really make sure that the family has the care that they need. And my mom had a really great Indian friend who's very traditional and kind of helped us navigate all this. But she did our hair cutting ceremony. And when the year ends, the tables turned. It's the family's turn to thank the Indian friend for all of the support that they gave us. And so where they cook for us, we cook for them. And we have a feast. And we close out the ceremony with a hair brushing ceremony. And she comes through and she uses a comb and she brushes everybody's hair in the family, and she shares memories of of our mom with us. And it's a beautiful time, and it doesn't feel that way. And so when I started doing art, I started finding that, oh, it's not just art, it's healing in the spirit of creation. And I don't think we really think about that, but especially as women, we have a very unique connection because we are life givers, we're life bringers, and we nurture our communities. We build our communities. Even if we don't necessarily give birth ourselves, we're aunties, we're teachers, we're the people within our circles that give care, and it gives us um, a unique power that we don't often think of, a connection to creation. And art is another extension of that. And I find that when we start changing our perspective of grief and healing, and even through just art, it kind of reminds us that we're not powerless. And I think oftentimes when we're grieving, it's really hard to see that because we do feel isolated. We do feel like there's no way through. And depending on how you experience that grief and what caused it, it's different. We don't always come through it unscathed. But I find that when you start looking inward and you start creating, and it doesn't matter what you're creating, it could be art, it could be, what you're doing in your job, writing a code, or, just whatever it is that we do, whatever it is that we create, whether we're cooking or we're making a meal for our family, there's healing in that. Because we're giving care, we're making sure that not only we are taken care of, but that the people around us are taken care of. And it really opens a whole new path forward through grief. And that's really what's been pulling me through over the last year, is just understanding that, yes, I feel stuck and I don't know my way forward, but I'm getting there. Like I'm making that path as I go. And with everything that I create, whether it's a painting or a drawing or what a meal, in just doing something, um, I'm healing. And I think that's something that we just kind of miss out on, because when we're grieving, it's we're so focused on trying to navigate what we feel, trying to function as if everything is normal. But when you're grieving, nothing is normal. Nothing feels right. And our year ended of grieving, and you know you like we know it's not the way it is. That you don't It's not just something that you can be like, okay, it's been a year, you're over it. um but I was hoping that's what would have happened for me, but it wasn't. And so, like this last year, I really struggled with like, okay, my grieving period's over, but I'm not healed. I haven't really said goodbye. I'm not ready to. So what do I do? And so like I've really learned over this last year that in order for me to heal, it's to realize that there's not a timetable for healing. There's not a schedule, and it's not going to be on my time or as soon as I want it to be. It's just going to happen when it happens. And in the meantime, you have to just keep making your way forward through that grief. And for me, it's through creation, through creating art, through creating, my doodles, creating t-shirt designs, creating platforms for Native people to have a voice. These are the things that are helping me to navigate my grief and to heal. And I think for all of us, I think it's important for us to find that pathway to healing. And I don't know how many of you guys are nerds out there, but there's a movie called Fanboys, which is one of my, I think it even tops my love for Star Wars, and would go to my number one because it deals with grief, and saying goodbye, before death happens. But there's a great line that stuck with me because they're talking about, like, what do you do in life? And one of the characters says, you got to find your Death Star. And the guy's like, okay, wait, I don't understand, but you know what? I'll bite. Go ahead and explain what you mean. And he's like, you got to find your Death Star. He's like, the greatest thing that Luke Skywalker ever did was he destroyed the Death Star against all the odds. He found that one, not only found it, but he made that one perfect shot that destroyed the Death Star and saved the universe. And he's like, and that's what you got to do in life. You got to find your Death Star. And so, for me, my Death Star is art right now. That's the one thing that I have right now that, is helping me to find meaning and to find healing. But, I think that's something that we should all strive to do, is to find our Death Star in this life, to find that one thing that makes us great, that makes us feel great. And it's not always going to be something as epic as destroying the Death Star, but it's a beginning. And so, I thank you all for just listening and for letting me rant. And I really appreciate having this platform to be able to share my story, um, and to be able to talk about this, because I think it's something that we're all struggling with. We're all trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure out, like, what happens now. Um, how do we move forward, not only as individuals, but as a global community? Like, how do we move forward from this in a way that, is not only healthy, but helps us build a better future than what we are saying goodbye to, when this pandemic happened. It changed the trajectory of everyone and everything. And, I think we're all just trying to figure out our way forward now. And as hard as things have been for me, I cling to the hope, and I see that hope being created, like, in the people around me, just in the way that we're striving to build community care, not just for, like, our immediate communities, but for global communities, um, to help them heal from the tragedies that they've gone through, the struggles that they're facing, and just really trying to be in this together. And I think that's the one thing that, we should all strive to remember as well, is that, we're not alone in our grief. We're not alone in our struggles. And there's always going to be somebody there to reach out their hand and to pull you up when you are down and you don't know how to get up on your own. There's going to always be somebody there who will pull you up and help you. So again, just thank you all for being here, and thank you for letting me rant and just talk. I really appreciate it. So thank you all so much.